Welcome to another episode of the YA Podcast. I'm your host, Ryan Keaton, joined always by Lorenzo Baylor.
What's up?
And today we have special guest, Pastor Dr. Phillip Smith. Phillip, welcome.
Hey guys, what's up?
What's going on?
Good to be here.
So Phillip, tell our listeners a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, I pastor Faith Harvest Church, which is right outside of Knoxville in Lenoir City, Tennessee. It's a rural kind of context. We've got farmland all around us, which is super fun. But grew up here in Knoxville and then went to school out at Union University and felt a real strong call on my life to do what God wanted me to do, and that was more like obedience than anything else. And my dad was a pastor, and so I knew what he did, but I just wanted to be obedient. And that led us to New Orleans to prepare to go overseas. And so while we were there, Katrina hit, which was super fun. That'll help prepare you for things. It'll also help you prepare to, get rid of all your stuff since it was gone. Wow. Right after that, we went overseas and we spent 10 years with the IMB. And after those 10 years, did different roles. With one was with Journeyman, just helping kind of prepare Journeyman to long-term serve in an overseas context. And then we were city strategists, where we focused on a particular population segment, and those were mega cities. And then something happened called the Arab Spring, if you're familiar with the Arab Spring. And when that hit, we realized that as missionaries, we didn't know a lot about social media or strategies related to that. And so I said, well, I'll figure it out. And so we went in that direction and started developing strategies to not only be safe as foreigners in hot zones, but also how to use that strategically as we're dropping in and then exiting out for various reasons, but also with just, hey, in your overall strategy, how do you use this for advocacy, but also for engagement? So we were there for like 10 years, and then God said, move back to the States. And we're like, I think you're making a mistake here, because everything was awesome. Our kids were good in school, in Arab schools. That's not normal. We had great team and great house church, and we knew that he was leading us in that direction. And so we developed an exit strategy, and with no job or anything, our family of 5 moved back to the States. And the only thing that didn't make sense to me, Ryan, was to pastor a normative-sized church that might be in need of revitalization or replanting, and that's because I didn't prepare for that. I had no training in that, but also, I don't give off the traditional vibe, if that makes sense.
Sure.
And so that's the only thing that I wasn't, putting my application in for. And so 2 years went by. We did some church consulting during that time, but didn't land a full-time, ministry gig until this church called. And so this church called and said, hey, we would like to meet with you. And I said, well, God opened the door. I walked through it and went and met with them and shared some, just calling on my life and vision for me and where I would like to go. And then they said, well, we'd love to hear you preach. And I went, okay. And I said, well, let's do that. And went and preached, and we were leaving the parking lot. Me and my wife were leaving the parking lot, pulling out of the parking lot, and she looked over at me and kind of went, well, that's over with. And I'm like, that's encouraging. And then they called before lunch was over and said, we want to meet again. And I'm like, why? Like, what? I thought but eventually we kind of walked into it as hey, I really think that this is where God is leading us. I'm willing to walk into it and risk if you all are. And so what I didn't know at the time was that they had a core group of people that wanted to move towards church health. They just didn't know which way to go. And so, man, a pastor with zero experience in pastoring, walking into that situation, and we can go pretty far. And wow. So just started running, if you will, in that direction. And it's been a good journey. I've been there 7, 8 years, something like that now. So
That's awesome.
it's been fun.
So you said you're married, you have kids.
Yeah. We got 4 kids, 4 girls all the way.
That's awesome.
Several of them were born overseas, and we have one born here. And so right now, I have a senior in high school and a kindergartner.
There you
Oh,
go.
okay. The full spectrum.
Yeah, it's great. It's so much fun. I do have a male dog. His name is Axel. So you got to have something to help with
That's
things,
right.
you know?
Balance
That's
it out.
right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Man, there's so many areas we can hop into, I think, about just that kind of recap of your life. But one thing I would like to kind of double click on a little bit is just, you said your dad was a pastor and then you felt a call to ministry. And I know that a big emphasis that we're going to be focusing on is calling out the called. What did that look like for you growing up in a Christian home? Pastors' kids get a bad rap a lot of times. And so what did that kind of look like? How would you, and maybe, how would you encourage churches to continue calling out the call? But then also, if there's like somebody listening who's struggling with that call, maybe it could be a multifaceted answer, but kind of walk through that a little bit with us.
Yeah, I think there's a part where we have to be open, like, as individuals, we have to be open to God's leading in our lives and what that looks like. And then, of course, we have to create an environment in our churches where we can explore that, or we can step back from that at times. And so for me, I think I was just given the opportunity to iron that out over time. If that makes sense. And so I know that there were 2 distinctive events in which I was like, I really think this is where he's heading in my life. But I don't want to talk to anybody about it. I don't want to verbalize that. And so I did verbalize it with someone, and they kind of said, well, take your time with it. Let's not make any announcements, because, 25 years ago, if you made an announcement like that, Ryan, you got brought up in front of the church and they had talked about all this stuff, and that was fine. I was okay with that. I don't know that would work as well in some of our contexts today. I would massage that out a little bit different in my church, but then there was another event where it was very clear that he was calling me to be obedient. And that's a strange thing, because usually I'm called to preach, or I'm called to be a missionary, or I'm called to, I'm called to be a deacon that's a chemist, I mean, there's these other things. But just obedience is open-ended. And we can kind of just walk in that and what he presents for us. And so if that's going overseas, it's going overseas. If it's going to Florida, it's going to Florida. Like, right? I mean, not that I recommend Florida to people. I mean, it's hot. So,
sure.
But
sure as the Middle East, but
it's always the Middle East. It was hot. Yeah, that's true. It was awesome. It rained a couple times over there. It was fun. And the second country that we lived in, they had snow. They had snow about as much as us in East Tennessee have, which was really unique. But it's also just like East Tennessee. If it snows, everything's shut down. Like, ain't nobody going nowhere.
Yeah.
It's done. Yeah. But leaning into that and just to that calling, and then having people along the way who can kind of go, hey, I'm watching you. I'm observing you. I'm affirming what God is doing in your life. Just keep going. Right? Just keep going. I remember there was a guy that was like, hey, look, I don't know what God's calling you to do, but I know he's calling you to do something. Just be obedient to that and roll. And I knew then, okay, now let's roll. Kind of deal.
Can you talk about, and you can get into as much detail as you want about this. I was having a conversation with a friend the other day, and we were talking about just transition in life and being obedient, and how, a lot of time God likes to surprise is the best word I can come up with, just with like, okay, we're moving right now, where you're probably in a season where you're comfortable and things are going great. You feel like you got a good grasp on your life, and then the Lord's like, okay, I'm transitioning in this way. Can you talk about like how you walked through that, and what did it look like when the Lord was kind of calling you to come back to the States? Like what did those kind of promptings look like for you practically, and then trying to figure out how to, essentially switch your whole family and your life back to a whole nother country?
Yeah, Lorenzo, that's a great question. And nobody likes to talk about that, right? They love to
Yeah.
talk about missionaries going, right? But they don't ever want
Right.
to talk about coming, So we had been there for a while and we were able to kind of watch some people do exit well and watch some people not exit well. And so we knew that we wanted to do that solely in his obedience and his timing. And so what we started doing when me and my wife kind of said it out loud, like we started feeling the Holy Spirit kind of leading us in that way. We said it out loud. We were like, "Oh, okay, we need to have some spiritual mentors speak into our life and ask us some really hard questions. Are we scared? Because we had some crazy things going on. That was at the height of the ISIS kind of Daesh, the kind of thing, and
Yeah.
that was about 3 hours from us.
Oh wow.
So like we were asking some tough questions on ourselves. And so we had some mentors that speak into our life, kind of do that. I called a pastor in East Tennessee and said, "Hey, can you come out and hang out with us? It would benefit our souls if you would come out." And he was like, "Yeah, I'll maybe come out in the spring." This was in the fall. And he was like, "I'll probably come out in the spring." And I said, "Well, we might not be here."
Mm.
And he was like, "How about in a month or two?" And I said, "That would be fantastic." And so now this is a testimony to him, right?
Yeah.
Who messed up his schedule and got on a plane. That wasn't cheap. And came over to us and I said, "Let's go 3 or 4 days of some really hard questions." And so he came over, and it was probably about the time that he started speaking sentences clearly after jet lag, about
Right.
24, 48 hours. He started asking some questions, some good ones on motive and perspective and
Yeah.
calling,
Yeah.
and was like, "Hey, I really think," and by the way, I didn't agree with a lot that this pastor said. And so I knew that if we both agreed, then Jesus was kind of absolutely moving in that direction. And after day 2 or 3, he goes, "Hey, we need to start making a plan. We absolutely need to start making a plan. This, I think, is totally of the Lord." And so we did just that. We started making a plan to exit. There were a couple people that wanted us to, "Hey, don't leave until you have a job. Don't leave until you have a job." But remember, we were fine. We were happy. We were content. Like, we were doing ministry that no one else was doing. We also knew that no one would do that ministry after we left.
Yeah.
That's hard. Okay.
Wow.
And so we knew we would just stay. And so we picked a date and said, "We're getting on a plane on this date."
Wow.
And so we did, and came back to the States with no job and 3 kids, which is extremely challenging, but also it's a testimony of leaning into the obedience part again.
Right.
Right, where he said, "Do this, we got to go do this." And if we would not have had those conversations, Lorenzo,
Yeah.
so it was 2 years.
Wow.
Okay, so 2 years.
2 years of working through how to move, or
No, sorry. So when we came back from the field,
yeah,
we did not land well, if you will. We did not have a job in a ministry position for
2 years. Wow. Okay.
Yeah, and so during that time, you're living in mission housing because you don't have a job. Like, you can't. You're looking for a job. I applied for a lot of jobs, Lorenzo. I flew to California and to North Carolina and back in positions that I should have, and the Lord just closed the door every time.
Right.
It was kind of. It was, and not. My wife will describe it as not a good time.
Yeah, sure.
Like, we were not having a good season, if you will.
Yeah.
But if we would not gone through those steps that we took to leave, it would have been a different story, right?
Absolutely.
But we kind of looked back, and there were several times where me and my wife looked at each other and went, "We know this was what God wanted."
Sure.
And
Yeah.
so we can make it another week. We can make it another week, kind of deal. And so that was a hard journey, Lorenzo. But it also, if I can segue in, it also taught us a ton about revitalization, because during that time, our family only made $1,500 a month, and we never went without.
Wow.
Okay, there were times where people in the church where it was awesome. Lorenzo, I was interning at a church to get some church staff experience because I didn't have any church staff experience. And my cubicle, with our 10 years missionary experience, my cubicle was next to the college senior and his
Yeah.
little, it was humbling. Okay.
Right.
It was awesome though. But somebody would say, "Hey, Phil, your name is on a bunch of stuff in the kitchen." And I'm like, "I ain't got nothing in the kitchen," and go in there and there's somebody, it looks like somebody did a mass Costco run and had my
Wow.
name on a bunch of stuff, and so the Lord continually provided,
That's
continually
crazy.
provided during that time. Well, that lead into a revitalization context where you make a decision or encourage a direction and you might lose 15% of people just like that.
Yeah.
And so we had to kind of ask some hard questions of, well, is that worth it? And we'd already been through that 2 years of, yeah, he's worth it, man. Absolutely. And so moving in some of those directions, what we went through prepared us for what we were going to go through in the revitalization kind of
That's
journey.
so good.
That's
So
awesome.
good.
Talk a little bit about, so you had a really strong social media strategy. You're in a country you can't name. Just on conversations we've had before this, you've talked about even the privacy and protection. So as broad as you can, but also to give a little picture, just kind of talk about that just for, I mean, even me who's been around missionaries, but just the danger that needs to go into it, but also the protection you take. Just talk a little bit about that and maybe some principles out of that we can learn from.
Yeah. So first and foremost, when there are laws, right? Those laws depend on those countries. And sometimes those laws are, you could pick up the phone and call your cousin who works for that company, that social media company, whatever it is, and kind of go, "Hey, tell me about this person." And they'll just tell you, right? Even though there's laws protecting that, those phone calls happen. And so because we know that, we have to kind of guard, if you will, as best we can, especially those in closed countries, what they post, how they post, but also how grandma's tagging you.
Sure.
I got tagged with several other missionaries in open countries by a pastor, a good pastor, loving pastor who just wanted to encourage, right? But what he did was he lumped me in the missionary category, and then I had to go, "Hey, can you take that down real quick before anybody else finds out?" Kind of deal. Because at that point we had also already been deported from a country, so we got kicked out of a country, and so
Because you were missionaries?
yes. Let's
Okay.
just say that because we were doing our job.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. But there were also several others. So they had a list
Right.
of us, if that makes sense. So back to social media. So make sure that we're posting well. Also talking to our family about how they can post well. So that's a kind of advocacy protection piece. Well, then we've got hot countries. That's what I call them, where you get in and an event happens and we need to evac you out. Well, training missionaries how to go in, make as many friends as possible, connect with them digitally, and then if they get evac'd out, then they still have digital connections, right? And that's their people group. That's the reason they're there. And if they can't be there on the ground all the time, they can definitely be there digitally. So helping them do that well, helping train them to do some of that. And that's hard for missionaries because most missionaries want to be on the ground, hands in the dirt, and so kind of helping them learn how to do that as to make the most of the time that they're actually there. But we also trained college students on how they can, a lot of colleges and a lot of BCMs and student ministries at Union, we used to have go trips. You're going to go for a week. Well, before you get there, why don't you start looking for friends? And so by the time you land, you've already got friends. And those are the connections so we're training, all the way. So we're training people here, we're training people there. But then, of course, for long-term missionaries in developing strategies, like how can I utilize targeted advertising? How can I utilize media in such a way that we can, draw people into conversations? Even utilizing utilizing current technologies.
Sure.
Whether that's AI or whatever you want to, any of those, to how they can even filter out people that want to know more about Jesus or are just plants that want to arrest people. Does that make
Sure.
sense?
Yeah. And, I'm sure most of our listeners, or maybe they're on top of it, but this seems like it would be a new concept to a degree, but you were doing this over a decade ago because you've been at your church for 7-8 years. You were out for 2 years. So, I mean, you've been doing this for a while. This is something that's been happening. And I think social media technology, it can get a bad rap because there is so much evil that's in it, but there can also be a lot of strategy in it too. And I've heard of, things that you're talking about. Colleges are using this to connect college students to the BCM before they even come. They're starting Bible studies over the summer between their senior year and when they start their freshman year so that they're connected to a group. So these are strategies that are happening maybe even in Tennessee that people don't realize. That can be really positive. And so churches could do the same thing to help connect.
Absolutely. Absolutely they can. And because most of our churches are in a geographic location, we can do searches based off of that with radiuses. And if you mix together that with a demographic survey, you can target really well people in your community. And it's not that complicated. If you bring in a young person that has a desire for that, they'll go and they'll YouTube and they'll figure all that out and then just roll with them. That's another way that you can help use, partner with them to do some of those strategies that you might not be as familiar with.
Did you have any issues running into like fake profiles, bots, things like that? Is there ways to filter that out? How do you know the person you're communicating with is an actual real person?
Yeah. There are bots that you can have that will filter those out based off of conversations. And because once you start a filtering process, and by the way, we do this right in our churches, right?
Sure.
A guest comes, we're filtering out that process. Do they want to get more involved? Do they just want to come and be a part of the sit and see, which that's great, but that doesn't get the devotion of my time. My time's over here, right? So we do that in the church, but also there, they would do that even trying to get to a phone call. If you could filter down and then get to a phone call, so there's ways where you can have, and I know it's burner phones, right?
Sure.
Have burner phones, and you use those to filter out and have conversations with people because some really cool movements took place in the Middle East through exactly what we're talking about. Where people called in, they had a phone conversation, led to a follow-up, which led to, houses, baptizing houses. It was that kind of a thing. So this stuff is, just taking a look at what God has gifted you in and rolling with that in obedience, I think is huge. So,
wow. I mean, I don't want to divert the conversation too bad, but you mentioned something about being in the Middle East during like the whole ISIS thing. I mean, I would imagine that was like, going, I don't even know the danger in that. I mean, was it kind of wild having or trying to manage doing missionary work and seeing people saved and things like that? When 3 hours away, people are literally dying, and whatever that is, you have a more understanding on what that's like than me. I would love to just hear a little bit about that. I don't want to divert the conversation though, just curious.
Yeah. Fear's real.
For sure.
And there are moments, and I'll say for most missionaries, there are seasons, right?
Yeah.
Where you go through these seasons where something happens, an event transpires, or something along those lines. But also, most missionaries go through a lot of preparation to get to the field, and they've already counted a lot of that cost.
Sure.
And so some of it is we just need to give some missionaries time to, give them a rest and relaxation time. Like, hey, let's get you out of the country. Let's let that pressure cooker kind of, let's get the pressure off. All right, and give you some rest and spiritual nourishment, and then kind of get you back in. There are others that are just made, and this is how we're all uniquely made. That their capacity to handle that type of stress is limited. And so they don't need to be there. And
Right.
so prayerfully going, hey, let's find you a spot. Like,
Sure.
we're not, no one's saying we're not called or anything. We're just saying, let's find you the best spot, because we had one missionary that came off the plane and went from the plane to their apartment and didn't leave that apartment for a while. And so we're like, hey, like, we need to get out of here. Like, we need to get out of the house. And eventually it just did not work out. And
Yeah.
so we're like, hey, let's help transition you to somewhere else.
Like another country or just
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah,
Wow.
and there's some of that, where we go through seasons of healing. Like at one point we had a single guy that was in a location that was difficult, and so we evac'd him from his country to another country just to rest, heal, but then kind of get back out there. And he healed well and got back at it and
Yeah.
got back out there. And so so some of that is just let me tell you. Let me give a personal example. There were seasons where I knew we were in danger, but not any more dangerous than driving down the road here. Right. There was a missionary that was killed near us, and that amped it up, right? Because we didn't know at the time, like what. And I remember clearly I had turned my back on a national, and when I did, I spun around real quick, and I knew at that point I was like, "Ooh, okay, I need to talk to somebody." Like,
Yeah.
I need to, and that's a self-evaluation, right? Where, I'm checking on my own soul, right?
Right.
So I made a phone call that day and was like, "Hey, I need to talk to somebody because
Yeah.
I didn't think this was affecting me like it is, but it is." And so as a result of that, I want to walk through that in a healthy way and not get 2 weeks down the road and not wanting to leave my apartment. Does that make
Right.
sense?
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, that's good. Wow.
I think that you have a unique perspective because you have been in so many like different camps. You've been in the Christian seminary, you've been in a hostile country as a missionary, you are in a rural context with revitalization. And I think in each area, and one thing I talk a lot about with churches and young adult ministry is the idea of a person of peace. And really in every context, you to some degree need that person of peace. In the Middle East, you need a person of peace. In small town Tennessee, when you try to revitalize a church, you need a person of peace that you can go to and bounce ideas off of. If you could kind of provide that perspective as far as like how important that was for you as a missionary, but also how important it has been for you in a revitalization effort.
Yeah. I think that person of peace concept is vital for us, but that's also a part of that is us listening to the Spirit, right? Us walking in the Spirit and listening to the Spirit even, and we could do that as we go to the grocery store, right? Before we walk into the grocery store. And this is, so to transition, what we learned overseas, we then brought back from the field. And so we have something in our church right now that we call Disciple Making 101, where we learn how to first off be disciples, and then once we're disciples, we make disciples. And a part of that is a person of peace concept. So if you mash together that listening, following the Spirit with that person of peace kind of concept, then you're kind of evaluating, asking the Spirit, hey, is this the person of peace, right? And there are times where that person of peace, man, they want to know everything about, like, they want to know everything about Jesus. And then there are other times where they don't want to know anything about Jesus. And so I kind of use the oven or the stovetop concept where your focused attention is on that front kind of eye that's closest to you. When there's times where that person of peace is not interested. And so what you do is you just pick that, item up and you move it to the back burner, right? They're not out of your view, but you're also still engaging with them. You're just not giving them your focused full attention. And that's hard for people, especially as we're trying to build relationships with people far from Jesus. Like, do you know how much energy it took me to invest in this relationship? And now they don't want to talk about, well, let's not cut them off. Okay.
Yeah.
Because we're still trying to build that relationship with them.
Right.
And recognizing, I think it's really hard for churched people to recognize when that person is just not interested in the gospel. And so at that point, not only putting them on the back burner, but you're not, because young people especially, we have limited time.
Mhm.
Right? There's only this much time. And so if I'm willing to give some of that limited time to reaching people, then I need to make sure that it's worth that reaching people concept, and that I'm using my time where Jesus wants me to use my time, and not just spinning my wheels, if that makes sense. And I think it's really hard for those to not cut off relationship, but move a relationship, kind of give distance to that.
Do you think spending so much time overseas and kind of living in the different cultures and things, and then coming back here, has your approach to discipleship, even sharing the gospel with somebody, has it, obviously it's probably looks different, like, have you found it to be like, man, I know sometimes you can, some people maybe come to the States and like, man, they're just spoiled over here. Has it been like, has it been frustrating at all? Just trying to, relearn a culture, and then, apply, something that may be, elementary or easy to communicate in one sense, being here, like, okay, they are just not grasping this based on, their worldview and everything that comes along with, for lack of a better term, being an American,
Yeah.
What does that look like, kind of stepping back into this world,
Yeah. So two things. One, it was a whole lot easier to have spiritual conversations over there, because they have not separated spiritual language out of their common vernacular. And so, good morning greeting over there is kind of like this: good morning, praise the Lord. How are you and your family? Praise the Lord. They're good, praise the Lord. Everything's good. How is the Lord treating you today? And so it's easy to segue.
Wow.
Right. It's easy to segue that. Right.
That's interesting.
So that's super, super easy. Whole lot harder here. Right. But here's the other thing about being back in the States and understanding and viewing and recognizing cultural shifts.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So we're constantly trying to listen to current culture,
Mm-hmm.
so that we can bridge the gospel into it, right? And so we're constantly listening. We're constantly changing the way that we are trying to have conversations with people, right? So I have like 5 different ways that if I am engaging someone, far from Jesus, and I have like, because I work with church people.
Yeah.
Full time. So
Yeah.
I have to make certain strategies and certain commitments of time not to do that. And so I have 2 restaurants in our town, and I go there. I go there weekly for the sole purpose of getting to know those people and just building relationships with them. And so I know their names. I walk in the door, they holler at me by name. I know what's going on in their life.
Yeah.
And I'm listening to them for opportunities that I can just kind of sneak right in there with the gospel. And they're telling me things that I don't understand and I don't know.
Right.
All right. I still don't understand the anime world. I don't get it. Okay. I know that there's a lot there. I just don't understand.
Right.
But I'm listening constantly, right?
Right.
So that I'm listening for cultural cues. Right. I try new things. It is a book. It is not a Bible. And it's called The Gospel by Gen Z.
Yeah.
The Gospel According to Gen Z, something like
Cool,
that.
Carl.
Yeah.
Yeah. I will try to use some of those little pieces, right? Even if my sermon, right, even preaching outside, I'll use a little piece there just to see if I can hook someone next gen alpha, right? Just with some of those words, just to have a conversation with them, a follow-up conversation with them. So we're constantly learning. That's what makes ministry exhausting, is because we're trying to constantly observe, filter, and then use different strategies from culture that we don't understand necessarily.
Mm-hmm.
But then we have to train each other on how to do that.
Well.
And that's the missionary part. There's a good book called Tradecraft.
Mm-hmm.
And it kind of teaches church members to be missionaries.
Yeah.
And I'm like, that, and which is what we should be doing anyway. So I did that. I think that answered that, right?
Yeah, it did.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So, as we're kind of getting close to the end, is there just any word of encouragement? You're a pastor, so from a pastor in a rural context to another pastor, what's a word of encouragement you can maybe give as they're trying to figure out maybe obedience? Maybe they're trying to engage young adults or a segment of people they're having a hard time engaging. Just a word of whether it be obedience, strategy, whatever it may be, just a word of encouragement you could give.
Yeah, man, keep going. Guys, keep going and be faithful to what He is calling you to do and me to do. I don't think that we have always be listening and learning. Our church doesn't have all the answers, that's for sure. We're struggling right now. I'd love to hear if you or Lorenzo have anything on next gen or even young adults that aren't in college. We're talking about the trades industry. I tried to get lunch on Sunday. Hey, can I get lunch with you this week? And he was like, I worked 75, 80 hours last week. And I'm like, not right now. Sleep is important.
Sure.
Okay. Yeah. Let's right. But I would love to hear any tips that you all have on that, especially in a rural context. These guys aren't necessarily going to college.
Yeah.
Right. So they're still at home, but they're also working like that full-time status. And so I'd love to hear anything you all have to add into that. But as from a pastor's perspective, guys, keep being faithful. And I was challenged early on in being a pastor that what we needed to do. So what's a common characteristic of pastors that are actively revitalizing their church? Like they're actually helping along the way. And they said they just need to pull the trigger. And I said, that's a really low bar.
Yeah.
And he said, yeah, they just need to do something. And so if I'm speaking to pastors and encouraging them to move forward in revitalization, I bring Nerf guns.
There you go.
And I give them Nerf guns with Nerf bullets, and I make them put the bullet in the Nerf gun. I make them rack the slide, and I make them actually pull the trigger. And then they can shoot me if they want to. That's fine. I'm an easy target. But I make them pull that trigger, and then I let them keep those guns, those Nerf guns, so that they can. Hey, as a reminder, man, pull the trigger, do it. Okay,
I love that. Love that.
Do it, pull the trigger, because He is worth it.
That's awesome.
Okay? Because He is worth it. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's to kind of that question you asked. First, thank you for that encouragement, because being on the front lines, I mean, what other pastors need to hear. The daily grind and the struggle. And that is hard, engaging young adults that aren't your traditional go to college, whatever, because, I mean, it boils down to the things you've talked about, and that's being strategic, but also being relational and just meeting them, not having a cookie cutter plan of if you don't fit this program or this specific strategy, then you're not in our peripheral, you're not even in our viewpoint at all. And so just offering spaces to meet them where they can. I know for us, I have a couple of guys, one, for example, and he listens to our podcast. So shout out, Brett, if you're listening to this. I'm sorry, I'm using you as an example.
Right.
But he's a lineman or a lineman assistant, right? And so he's right now, when we're recording this, he is meeting up with a team headed to Florida to be there to do that trade, right? So he at times is right in the grind of our daily consistency of Sunday school and Wednesday nights or whatever. But then there's seasons where, like these past 2 months, he's on the road. And so just finding ways to still connect with him, whether it's through text message or a Snapchat or, having a Bible. Like we have, you can create groups on the Bible app. And so there will be seasons where we create a group on the Bible app and we'll walk through a devotion together. And on that, you can see if they've read it, and you can, it says like talk it out at the end. We can add our own little thing. And so we're still having community in Bible study together, even though we're in different cities, different schedules. He may read it at 4 a.m. I may read it at 10 p.m., but we're still walking through it together and conversing. So just things like that.
That's good.
But to do that, you have to have a relationship with the person. And so that's like you're saying, you have to find times and create times intentionally in your schedule to engage people who may not find time on your schedule if you don't do it otherwise. And so, but Phillip, thank you so much for taking some time, hopping on our podcast.
Real quick, you said you got 2 restaurants. What kind of restaurants are they?
One is a coffee shop,
Ah.
and the other one is the Lord's Chicken.
There
Oh,
you
So
go.
love
Chick-fil-A.
that.
Gotta
Yeah,
gotta
yeah.
keep
Okay,
those
yeah.
going.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
The Lower's chicken. I
when
like
we're
that.
out that way, we'll have to
Yeah.
find some local spots.
Yeah.
Heck yeah.
Sweet.
So Phillip, thanks for hopping on the podcast. If anybody heard something that you said and wanted to follow up more, is there a way that they could contact you or they could continue the conversation?
Yeah, absolutely. They can go to faithharvestlc.com. That's our website, and then get me from there.
Okay.
I'm on the socials. I'm connected to Ryan, and if somebody just wants to add like a question to the notes or whatever, and Ryan's got my number, forward it on. I'd love to connect with you.
Perfect. Yeah, we'll make sure that website's in our show notes so you can go there and find that. But Phillip, thank you. Thanks for taking the time. I know you're busy, and thank you for taking time. Thank you for listening. And if this is your first episode, you have to go back and listen. We've had a great season of a lot of great guests, and there's been 2 other seasons before this one. This is our 3rd season.
Man, already 3?
I know. Here we are.
Wow.
And so make sure to go back to like, subscribe, share. A lot of our new guests come because somebody shared the episode. So make sure to go and to share. Tell your friends who need to listen to this. Special shout out to Colby and Mike for editing and producing this this episode and this series. And until we see you again, go win Tennessee for Jesus.
Peace.
We'll see you later.